Good afternoon, everyone. So nice to have you back this week. It is with great appreciation that we, the residents of Protection Island, acknowledge this land as the unceded territory of the Nanaimo First Nation and of their legacy throughout the island. Just a tiny bit of business first. Thanks, Emily and Marlene and Peter, for helping us set up, and all the other people that helped as well. This talk is being recorded. Emily will let us know in a day or two when it's available for future listening. Questions, Paul says he doesn't mind if you have a question during the talk, so just go ahead and put your hand up. If you're on Zoom, then just use the chat box, please, but mute yourself until the end if you can. Donations will go to NALT. That's the Nanaimo Area Land Trust and Area Land Trust. Last week, donations of $34.90 went to Parks Committee to help with their upgrade for the kids. And that's about it. And now our speaker, Paul, Executive Director of NALT, as I said, Nanaimo and Area Land Trust, whose mission is to support, promote, and protect the natural values of the land and water in our area. Paul was born in North Van and grew up in West Van. Parts of his early life were also spent on Bowen Island, Gabriola, and Savory Island, where he lived and worked in construction and commercial fishing. In his late 20s, he moved to the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia, where he worked as a chief shop steward for a large healthcare local. But after 10 years, he decided to return to the West Coast and Nanaimo. Paul says from an early age, he's been interested in the environment. His dad was an environmental prosecutor in the Fraser River, and I'm just not exactly sure what that means. So maybe you can elaborate on that when it's your turn. And he was moved to follow in his footsteps. So about 20 years ago, he happened to be hiking the boardwalk in the Lindley Valley when he noticed a NALT poster looking for new recruits. He applied for the job and was successful. And so Paul started with NALT in 2008 as part of a crew building the greenhouse at the Natural Abundance Native Plant Nursery and on Mount Benson, establishing trails and restoring some previously logged sites. With the support and mentorship of many NALT stalwarts, namely Gail Adrian, Paul has filled many roles with the organization, including his current position as executive director. The trust purchased Mount Benson Park with the help of the RDN, and lately, the newest acquisition, the Hamilton Marsh, but Paul will tell you more about that. Paul has a longtime partner with 3 daughters and 4 grandkids. In his spare time, I guess he doesn't get enough of the mountain. He hikes Mount Benson and spends lots of happy times with his grandkids. Please welcome Paul Chapman.
So thank you very much for that introduction.
You're welcome.
Paul Chapman, the Executive Director of the Nanaimo and Area Land Trust. And as Bev was saying, we are probably best known for, leading the efforts and raising the funds to purchase what is now Mount Benson Regional Park and also Cottle Lake Park in Lindley Valley. But we do a number of other things, and I will be talking about some of those today. The title of this presentation is Local Land Conservation in Uncertain Times. I feel like I have to warn everyone, there's going to be some depressing stuff here. But, I hope I intend to leave off with a hopeful note. And also, I think that it's really important to be full of hope when we're doing these things. It's too easy to despair and end up doing nothing. And, we don't all have to be full of energy and hope all the time, but we have to be there for each other when we want. So, thanks for sticking with me if you do. Next slide, please. We work across the territory of several First Nations. Our office is located in the Nanaimo territory, and much of what we do is in the Nanaimo territory, but we reach across lots of the First Nations of the Nanaimo Sea. We look for ways to try and foster relationships, build understanding, but everyone's doing that, right? So it's a long list of people knocking on the door, and we're one of those people knocking on the door. But we have opportunities, especially around when we're involved in fish habitat work. We do have some opportunities to work along with Nanaimo First Nation. Next slide, please. See, we're almost 31. We'll be turning 31 in April. So that's, I was joking this morning about there's some things I used to hate about myself at 31. I wish I still had, but so we're a registered society and charity. At the last count, we had about 535 members. And in 2025, we had 221 volunteers donate 3,776 hours to our efforts. And so our membership, amongst the lots of things they do, one of the important things to do is they supply us with funds that help with our operations and some of those hard to fund things that we do. And then as well, our volunteers and those hours they donate help us do the work we do. If anyone's interested in membership, please come up and let me know after the meeting. I'd be happy to bend your ear about becoming a member. Next slide, please. So this is just sort of a spatial representation of the things we do, mostly within the regional district of Nanaimo, but again, I'd say we have a healthy reach beyond the regional district. So you'll see some slides down further that will better display how far of a reach that is. But we carry on a number of different programs and projects throughout the regional district. Next slide, please. So before I get to the uncertain times, I'm going to talk about some of the conditions that we work in that are always here for us to deal with and the sorts of challenges that they represent. So the first one I'll talk about is some of the natural value. So on this map here is the biogeoclimatic zones of BC. So the different sort of ecoregions of BC. So if you find Vancouver Island on that map, and then find the east coast of Vancouver Island, and you'll see a thin little orange sliver there. And that is the coastal Douglas fir zone. It is the most imperiled zone in BC with the highest number of species at risk. Right? So, rare things live in rare places, and that's where we live. We're all rare things. Yeah. And, things that imperil the zone is, this is a beautiful place to live. This is where we build our cities. This is where we build our towns. This is where we, log. This is where we fish. This is where we shop and drive and all those things. And all those development pressures and economic pressures come to bear here in the coastal Douglas fir. I'll say CDF, probably sometimes coastal Douglas fir forest. And this is where we live, where we live, work, and play. If I'm going to steal a line from the promotions people, is this very thin slice of very rare place. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk to you about some of the human and political value. So, the CBF is the natural value piece, but there's also these other layers that we impose on this place that affect how we do what we do and what we can do. Next slide, please. So often in BC, you hear there are no treaties with First Nations, but that's not the case on the east coast of Vancouver Island. There's what the colonial government would call the Douglas treaties at the time. They have different names depending on different nations that signed them, but they all look like this, right? And they're talking about enclosed fields and villages, which isn't really the pattern of how things were done here by First Nations. There was a seasonal movement between places depending on food and cultural gathering. But this is the language that was used, and these are the treaties that were signed. And you could kind of look at that and think, maybe that the government of the colony at the time would have one understanding of what they were signing, whereas First Nations might have a very different one. And so when you think of enclosed fields, right, like that doesn't really fit with what was happening here. But if you're standing in a meadow full of camas, right, and you understand that camas doesn't spread very easily by itself, that it spreads well with purposeful human intervention, and you understand then the bulbs were an important food crop of First Nations. When you're standing in that field of camas, you understand you're standing in this agricultural field. And so, there's different understandings coming to this treaty and these treaties of the East Coast of Vancouver Island. And there's been a broad interpretation of the rights held in these treaties in court rulings. So rights to hunt across land, rights to fish, these have been upheld in courts using the language of these treaties. So it's been a broad interpretation of that. There are efforts to have modern treaties negotiated, but these are, the rights that belong to First Nations that we have to consider when we are thinking about saving this piece of land. Right. Next slide, please. And then 30 years after the signing of those treaties on the east coast of Vancouver Island was the ENN land grant. So this was the Esquimalt to Nanaimo land grant, and then through successive grants that moved up island. And it was the transfer of public land to private interest for the promise of building a railroad. So Robert Dunsmuir was the original recipient of this land. It's 1/5 of the area of Vancouver Island was transferred from public to private land. So all that open, unsettled area, public land that had been, those rights were promised to First Nations and to hunt and fish as before, it was suddenly transferred to private land, and First Nations were alienated from use of those. And it means that we live in a place where everything is privately owned. So if you're catching the ferry to Vancouver and you're looking towards, Howe Sound, and you're looking at the mountains there and the mountains beyond that, you're looking at crown land, right? Like, 90% crown land, 10% public land. But when you look back on that, and the next one's in the distance, you're seeing private land. And the ratio is more like 95% private land and 5% crown land. So it's a very different place that we live than most of what BC is. And that private land really changes how we do and what we can do around protecting an area. And most of that land, through successful ownership, is now private managed forest land. So this presents a barrier, but it also presents a barrier for negotiation of modern treaties. So if you're in BC, there are big, vast swaths of crown land that can come into that conversation about how a treaty might be settled. But here, it's land that First Nations have been alienated from through private ownership, and so it creates a complexity there as well. And some of that's playing out right now in the Cowichan ruling around land on the mainland, right? It's what does that mean to have a land claim across private land? That's something that we're dealing with either sort of calmly and rationally or really quite up in arms concerned about. So these are some of the complexities that we work with in our role. Next slide, please. I talked about that successive ownership moving to private managed forest land. So around here, that is Island Timberlands and Timber West, and they're jointly managed by Mosaic Forestry. And if you see on the map, the green area on the east coast that corresponds to where the ENN land grants were, that is the private land that was part of the ENN land grant that is now private managed forest land. So that transfer still is here today and something we deal with every day. And you hear about it when there's gates are closed and people can't go into the woods. Different groups of people that want to recreate through the woods can't do it private land, and they don't have insurance and they don't have agreements and like right. There's a very different relationship that our communities have with the land because of this. Next slide, please. And the agricultural land reserve, the ALR, right? I like agriculture. I like eating things. I like things growing. I'm a big fan of the ALR. But if you look at that map, again, find the east coast of Vancouver Island, and find the little green side of it on the map there on the east coast of Vancouver Island, it corresponds with that coastal Douglas fir zone you saw before. So agricultural land reserve land, ALR land, considers its highest use as agriculture. Doesn't mean it has to be in agriculture, but it has to be convertible to agricultural use. So you know, this place with these most imperiled zone in BC with the most species at risk. It's also, you know, a lot of it, its highest use in terms of our planning and our zoning is as agricultural land. And when I say agriculture, people are picturing, you know, some bucolic trip through the country where you're looking at fields and horses and crops. But most of this isn't yet converted to farmland. So it's really those big tall trees you drive past when you're driving along the old highway heading north of here, right? It's to be used for agricultural land, but not yet. So it's a question.
Oh, I mean, I just was wondering who designated it an ALR.
Yeah, it's a provincial designation from the seventies under the Dave Barrett government at the time. And you know, like my opinion of it is it's very important. It's reserved a lot of land for food production that would have otherwise been developed into, you know, something with housing or shopping or even something as far as surfaces and very little chance of restoration. But it also included some areas that maybe, you know, aren't the best used for agriculture. And I'd argue some of the spots that we look at, that is probably the case.
And that's crown land?
No. It's on bank ground, be almost all private land.
Right.
Yeah, so it's that zoning, like if we live on, you know, your housing is zoned here for one residential unit, but you might also live in a place like what I live, or zoned for, you know, something else. So it's ALR land is a zoning, yeah. So you can build a house on ALR land, but you can't build 10 houses on ALR land. And you know, there's limits what you can have. We used to be golf courses and trailer parks. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but as long as it's convertible back towards agricultural use.
And they determined that this was agricultural land because it was a good place to grow food.
Yeah, you know,
And I mean, they looked beside it and it wasn't good, so they said, okay, this is a agricultural land.
yeah, they look
And
at soil.
if you own it, you have to go by those things.
Yeah, if you have to follow agricultural, like I say, you can build a house, but you can't build a bunch of houses. This was a problem with what's called rusted rape. There's
Yes.
they're on ALR land, and they were carrying out a business that wasn't allowed under ALR rules, and that was that. Yeah. Now they were able, I think they will get an exemption and operate, but that's what, you know, one of those sorts of restrictions on ALR land.
Can you donate your land to agricultural land or not?
I don't know about that. I know that you can bring land into it. So like, for instance, if we had 40 acres of prime agricultural land and there were 40 acres of agricultural zone land that wasn't prime, and this one's outside, the good ones outside of the zone, we could do a swap and bring in 40, you know, prime acres for agriculture, take 40 out for conservation. We don't have 40 prime acres of agricultural land we can swap out, so it hasn't been an option for us yet, but it is something that can be done. Next slide, please. So this is where we are, right? These are the good old days. This is before the uncertainty that I'm going to talk about next. So, you know, I gotta flip a few pages here so I could catch up with my notes, but you know, this is where we are all the time. We're dealing with these complexities that maybe other places aren't dealing with, right? We do have treaties here on the east coast of bank ground. The land is privately owned, and it's the most imperiled biogeoclimatic zone in BC with the most species at risk, and it exists in the ALR too. Right, so these are some of those layers of complexity we have. Next slide, please. Welcome to uncertainty. You know, and the uncertainty, you don't have to go very far to find it, right? Turn on your radio and you're going to hear about what's happening in the world and all that uncertainty, you know, the sort of flailing machinations of in the United States and the near they can reach, those shifting alliances that are happening and the sort of rearmament of Europe and Canada, right? We're now looking at 5% of our GDP going to defense spending, which may or may not be a good thing. but that 5% is coming from somewhere. And then, you know, add in layers of economic uncertainty and what that means in terms of projections of profits and taxes and all those things. So, you know, we decided on the federal level that we need to increase our defense spending by, you know, considerable amounts. That money's got to come from somewhere else. Where does it come from? And, you know, often you hear it all the time, right? When in times of economic uncertainty, concerned about the environment gets bumped down the list of things. People are, you know, and understandably concerned about, you know, where's my shelter? What am I gonna eat? You know, what are my children's future's gonna look like? You know, these are the things I worry about in that economic terms. And then we have things, you know, like the affordability crisis, right? And particularly around housing. And so we have provincial laws that come in that say, we're gonna override local government planning and create zoning where that allows for density of building and it takes away those controls that a municipal government might have around what gets built where. And that has a bunch of implications like, oh, how do we get infrastructure there that we want, right? You know, all those costs that are associated with it. But also some of those zoning tools are really important to a group like the Nanaimo Area Land Trust, right? We look at riparian area setbacks, and the cities are greater than the provinces, right? So we can use that leverage to have more protections around rivers and creeks and restoring the habitat around that, right? Highly, you know, very important places. When we think of our home landscape, it's, you know, mountains and it's big tall trees and it's creeks and all the things that live in those and depend on those, all those iconic animals. And oddly enough, some of our best in Nanaimo protections around that are at the municipal level. And they're triggered by development permits. And that's when NALT can step up and say, hey, don't forget. But some provincial bills override that control at the municipal level and slip right into approvals because they're trying to build lots of housing so we can have affordable housing, right? So these motives are good motives, but the unintended consequences of those can prove to be quite damaging. Another thing that happens is in times of economic uncertainty, donations decline. Like we've seen since COVID, donations have declined. NALT has been pretty free of that. We've done well. Our members have really stepped up and support us. But other groups, and especially those big funding agencies, have had struggled with a decline in those donations. So you know, the kind of my joking phrase would be the environment in this economy, right? You know, you hear that sort of thing. So next slide, please. And then multiply everything by climate change, right? And this is the part where I could have reminded it. I said it'd be hopeful at the end. I promise it will be. But you know, we're taking all those uncertainties of the good old days, right? Those issues around that thin band of forest where those rare species exist and they're the most perilled forest in BC. You think about the uncertainty that's happening, that political uncertainty, and then multiply it by climate change, right? And what is that going to look like? And you know, in Nanaimo, it's going to look like changes in patterns of precipitation, for one thing. So what that means is, you know, we're going to have longer periods of dry and drought, and then we're going to have deluges of rain. So the same amount of rain, maybe even more, but in really compressed times. So it's going to come pounding down, and it's going to be warmer. So what used to come down and fall on the mountains as snow is going to wash down the mountains as rain. And you know, this creates all kinds of stress on, say, our built structures, right? You don't have to reach too far back in time to remember when, you know, everything along the Fraser washed out, and all those bridges across the Coquihalla and the number one, they washed out, and that was a climate event. You know, it's not too hard to imagine, you know, on a water system that depends on water being held as snow and slowly melting to fill its dams, like happened at Jump Creek, which is imagine a place where it doesn't snow. And say it doesn't snow for a few years. And, you know, we still get the same amount of precipitation, but we can't hold all that water. We rely on that snow to hold the water and melt slowly to fill our dams just before we hit that, you know, the long periods of drought. So instead we filled our dams and then we have long periods of drought with no snow contributing to it. What effect will that have on the Nanaimo? Right? And so these costs so we'd have to say build a much bigger reservoir and maybe more reservoirs. Building it down isn't cheap. And then looking at the cost of maintaining our transportation infrastructure, right? I mean, like just that one rain event, you know, and the billions that costs. So you know, for this, I would say we, you know, the line would be ignore the environment in this economy. The more we ignore it, the more we're going to have to pay. We pay on an emergent basis. We don't plan for these things. We don't try and change our habits to alter our trajectory towards, you know, a hot, uncertain future. Then we're looking at paying for things in an emergent way. You know, if you build out before an emergency, building plans for emergency, then that's, you know, that there are costs and it's, you know, they will be considered more than we are now. But if you wait until there's an emergency, it's got to be done quick. It's got to be, it probably will have to be replaced after you get it working on that emergency basis. You know, those costs are exponentially higher. So again, ignore the environment in this economy. We can't afford to do that. Next slide, please. The Hope Park. I'm at the Hope Park now. So.
Can I just ask one question about the climate change and water in Nanaimo? I think we've got a really good reservoir system here, do we? In Nanaimo, okay.
Yeah, we have a
reassuring.
Yeah, no, we have lots of capacity, and in the way that it works now, and the biggest users and wasters of water are us. That most of our water use is residential, like the vast majority of our water use is residential. So we have a real opportunity to impact how much water we draw off of that. But you know, if we have a 8-month-long drought and no snowpack, where's that water coming from? What's filling that reservoir? So you know, I won't predict too far in the future, but we have a good system that has you know, a reserve in it for what we have today.
And no data centers planned that you've heard about?
Yeah, you know, even if there were, you know, the data center on the new one that's being built uses roughly the same amount of water as a car wash.
Wow.
And which is still could be like a lot of water.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, say, you know, say this is the amount of water we use in a year. The industrial commercial amount is somewhere here, and most of that amount will be for irrigating, right? It's our use of water. You know, so our regular household use, our year-round household use is here. Then we have this big bump in the driest time of the year where we are watering our gardens all along.
No lawns, no lawns.
No.
But here again, back to hope.
Okay.
Back to hope. It's you know, I know it's ironic to be here. It's like, oh, what are we going to do in these uncertain times? And we've just managed to save 360 hectares, right?
Yay.
The 36 hectare wetland surrounded by, you know, the 324 hectares of maturing forests and all the different sort of vernal pools that exist in there, and this great sort of, you know, nearing the size of Stanley Park. We compare everything with Stanley Park here. Actually, in the NALT office, if we're trying to figure out like if the length of that, we refer to it as like an ebony length. Is it 1 or 2 ebonies? But
I'm 5 feet tall, and so we had a net that was 10 feet, and I was just like, "Oh yeah, that's 2 of me. 2 of me is lying down."
So figure either 2 ebonies long or almost the size of Stanley Park. So this is almost the size of Stanley Park.
And where exactly is Hamilton Marsh?
If you're heading inland from Qualicum Beach, sort of going up to the back way into Coos, right? So you go on the highway. Well, just after you pass under the highway, it's on the right hand side. There's Hilliers Road, so it does a loop around.
Is there a sign?
If there is, it's like this big.
Oh.
Like, But there will be some. So,
It's there.
yeah.
It's there,
It's
you know about
there.
it.
No, I've never been either.
No, let's go
But I
there.
supported it.
Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah. And
It's an asset.
and it's been acquired for, park and conservation before heavy use, right? Before we have the recreating heavily. So there's an opportunity to have a management plan in place that can absorb how we're gonna recreate there and what we do there and protect those natural values. So this is, Hamilton Marsh is an amazing thing. And we've done others, right? Lindley Valley, I mentioned, we were involved with Knight Point, Mount Benson, Southwind, Chelsea Island, Moorcroft Park, and Moorcroft Park wouldn't have happened without Gail Adrian, the founding executive director of NALT. Spending hours and hours and hours helping a community around Moorcroft and around what was a church camp. Find ways of protecting that. Like she really was integral to that. She wouldn't have, without the people that she activated to do that, it would not have happened. So Moorcroft Park. The Englishman River estuary, Westwood Ridges, not many people know because we didn't have to raise a bunch of money for it, but we informed the city and the regional district about some of the values of these areas of Westwood Ridges that were in private managed forest land. There is a bit of crown land there, but in private managed forest land, we were able to convince them the values of it were better as park than as private managed forest land, and they purchased it. Hamilton Marsh, we just talked about Hamilton Marsh and all those good things. But there have been federal funding cuts, right? Like the environment, the ECCC, so Environment and Climate Change Canada. Their budget has been dramatically reduced. Along with other federal requirements, there are layoffs happening there. There's some money still in some of the sunsetting programs that existed, but in other places it's not. And there are major funders that exist here provincially that rely on those federal funds to do acquisitions. That money is no longer there. It seems zero for 2026. So what are those? How does that impact say the future acquisitions? So, we've identified Cable Bay, Herb Plains, and places on the Nanaimo River for acquisition. And what's that going to look like? How are they going to be affected? So this is one of these uncertainties that we're dealing with. Next slide, I'll talk about a couple of those values. Right? So Cable Bay. And then I'm going to point at the picture, the maps at the top of this, right? So where you see the pink, that's Yuri Oak Meadow. And where you see the purple, that's older forest. Not old growth forest, but older forest. Although there are some trees in there that would be old growth trees. Better jump ahead on this slide. It's, this is where old growth trees and oaks and orchids, right, all come together around Dodds Narrows. It's really popular. Lots and lots of people go there. And it's also subject to this. There's a line down the middle of this map through the middle of the pink. And that's roughly where the trail down the Cable Bay is. So looking at that, to the west of that is slated for the zoning change to industrial land. And to the east of it, there's an active application for housing development, right? So all this area is potentially going to be developed.
Oh. What's the status of that? I've seen the signs when I've been down there.
The status of the industrial land? Well, if you look at the map here, there's roughly where that sinuous line goes down to the pink. That's roughly where the trail is. So you walk down the trail to the waterfront. That's protected in the sense that you have the 10-meter down to where the bridge starts, 10 meters there. In the proponents of the industrial park have said that they'll give another 100-meter average buffer to the west of it. So between where the trail is and where planned industrial is. Some of that is 50 meters wide, some of it's 150 meters wide. There's no such promise like that on the to the east, right, in the place that's slated for housing development. When you get down, walk down that path and you come to the bridge across the mouth of the creek there. You step off that bridge and you're no longer, you're now trespassing.
Wow.
So you're on private forestry land. That's I think that's Timber West that owns that. And then you walk through there and get to Joan Point Park, which is landlocked, right? There's no access to Joan Point Park, which is right on the point there, where you're at the swim block.
So are you out there a lot, physically walking around?
I'm not out there a lot, but there are people out there a
You
lot.
seem like you were, because you seem to know a lot about the areas and.
I've been there a few times, and it's, you know, it's like many.
So your job doesn't call for you to be out there then and observing things and doing things?
My job mostly calls for me to like be in front of a spreadsheet and like, answer emails. But and strategizing, yeah, for sure. But this is a place that has piqued our interest, and you know, I'm not sure that we will be able to acquire it. But I know we'll try.
I just wondered if Emily has told you about our restoration project here on Protection Island.
She won't stop talking about it.
Yeah, we can do it. We haven't done a tour yet, but we can do it after our presentation, sure. Yeah, yeah.
That'd be great.
Curious if NALT is making the public aware. I didn't know that these lands were, you know.
Yeah.
Is there a public outcry on this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
There's a huge problem.
Yeah, signs about it when you walk down the trail.
Oh, there are.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's usually first I'm
Telling, like handing out brochures, I've seen.
That wouldn't be NALT. Generally, we work in a more collaborative way with city and with landowners to try and come to a conclusion where we would be able to acquire the land. Right? So but there's certainly, you know, there's a Save Cable Bay group that are raising a lot of concern and a lot of interest in the place, and you know, they create the space where a group like NALT can be into.
Right.
They create that community concern where we can then offer it. We can have those conversations with the landowners and with the regulators and see if we can come up with some solution, and have those conversations with, you know, larger funding agencies. So
It's mostly an issue of purchasing the land. That's this is.
yeah, there's also the city had a study done on industrial land, and that study showed that they had a deficit, like they needed more than 30% more industrial land, you know, for whatever those calculations are that make a city viable. And so the pressure to rezone that land as industrial is going to be way up high. So there's the acquisition piece, but there's also the regulation piece. Next slide, please. This is the hopeful part. Harewood Plains. You've been to Harewood Plains. So this is the sort of place, when I was talking about those fields of camas, where you can understand that there's some indigenous agricultural practice happening. This is the place, right? These are fields of camas. Like I didn't know we had meadows like this until I, you know, saw them. So I said, oh, you gotta see, what is this place? You know, so if you look at the maps again, you know, it's in this, by the little curve at the bottom of the screen. That curve is the parkway. Where you see the purple, it's older forests. And these aren't like giant trees. These are smaller trees on very thin soils on top of, you know, hard packed rock that, you know, that make up that older forest. And where you see the pink, it's Gary Oak Meadows, and it's those big meadows. It's you know, this is again those rare places, rare species rely on rare places, and this is a place to be very unique property. So it's thin soils over hard rock, hard pan, or conglomerate rock. So the water doesn't seep in. It drops and runs down just at the surface or under the surface and gathers in pools. So we have these vernal pools, some spring wetland sort of, and the pools, so tiny little pools that exist here. And then you have these very rare communities of plant that exist around those pools. And there are 15 species at risk, so 8 federally listed and 7 provincial, so the provincial species at risk isn't really a thing. But federally, there are endangered species out. And so there are 3 of those at-risk species are endangered species, including this yellow and white flower, which is Asakia pinnata, which used to be called lotus pinnatus, which is the official floral emblem of the city of Nanaimo, thanks to Charles Thurple, who sort of hornswoggled in the city announcing it as the flower. But it also maybe gives us an obligation to protect that place. And when I say it's like rare, in Canada, it exists in abundance on the Hayward Plains. Like you can walk in there some years, depending on what's happening in the spring. In Ontario, you walk in some years and there's tons of it. Some years you walk in there because it's been drier or that there's less of it. But it happens in abundance on Hayward Plains. It happens in a few satellite spots in some on Gabriel and some up by the airport. And then if you were to draw the map of BC out, nowhere into BC, nowhere else in BC, nowhere else in Canada. It's an exceedingly rare plant. It exists in abundance at Hayward Plains and nowhere else in Canada. It does exist in the States. And it's a remarkable festival.
And I didn't know the official flowers.
So who owns this?
Field trip.
Field trip, yeah.
So the who owns this is a good question. The park right alongside the parkway, alongside the highway, is privately owned and zoned for development, for housing development. So I think it can have like 500 houses built there. And all the, the infrastructure that goes with that, the sewage, the power, the water, the roadways. And then south of that land, there's a BC hydro out there, and then you're into privately managed forest land. And those meadows, they don't sort of stop at those boundary lines, they exist across them.
There's 2 small city parks too.
Yeah, there are 2 small city parks called Lotus Pinnatus Park that were part of a property, a density transfer, because in a piece of this development property exists on the other side of the highway, so north of the highway, and they were given the ability to build more densely there for the gifting of the parks. So they're both called Lotus Pinnatus Park. And for years, I've never seen any Lotus Pinnatus there. But last year I saw it by one puddle, which is one of the pools look like. I saw some Osaki out of that. So that was like a miracle of miracles. But this, if I, from this angle, everything looks great. If I said hover above that, show you an aerial shot of it, what you'd see is a whole bunch of circles in the soil and lines through those circles and more of that. And what that is ATVs, so all-terrain vehicles.
No way.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Carrying up here. Like the big picture of the purple field there, that corner is a part of an ATV track where it's down to the rock, right? There's no soil there. And it interrupts the flow of water across that slope and channels it down and away from what could be habitat for Osaki and other plants. And that creates a real management issue, right? So nobody who owns it right now really wants to manage for those things because they're very difficult. But also when we're having conversations about protecting that space, one of the parts where everyone stops is who's going to manage it? How do we manage that? How do we stop those ATVs from going in there? And that's going to be a difficult thing that nobody's sort of leaping to take on. So add to that, right? There's management difficulties and then the high cost of land, right? This is not an expensive land, especially the stuff in the city that's zoned development, right? There's some value added in that zone that on a per acre basis makes it pretty expensive. So it's going to be expensive to buy in a time of sort of funding scarcity with the management difficulties. This is going to be more challenging than say something like Cable Bay. Mostly because most of the people that go there love to pair it up with ATVs. In fact, I I should correct that. It's not most people. It's very few people on ATVs that do a lot of damage.
And there's probably lots of other places to tear up at one point, and so it was, you know, so the effect was fairly minimal, but as they've been whittled down.
Yeah.
But they probably don't go when the flowers are out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You would see it all through there. Yeah, if you go on Google Earth and look for Hayward Plains, which is, you know, very near Color Dam and
Is it near the abyss?
yeah,
Yeah,
it's between the city and the abyss, you'll come to Hayward Plains. If you go on Google Earth, look on their maps, you'll see all of the patterns of the ATV wheels. They're all.
So I was thinking, maybe if the flowers were there, like in the summer when they're gone, then they may not know that this is actually.
It could be,
I don't think they care.
I don't do that.
yeah, I'd say that that probably is the case that some people don't know, but I would also say that, you know, there has been signage put out there over the years, and there's been attempts to try and educate, you know, motorized recreation groups about it and it keeps happening. And, you know, I would say that, you know, probably, you know, 99% of the folks who enjoy motorized recreation aren't doing that, who wouldn't think of it. But it's just that 1%, but they have the, you know, the soil is amazing. Yeah, they can wipe out thousands of years of, millions of years of, you know, of those connections and those evolving processes that had to happen in an afternoon of, you know, picking up mud. So full of hope, right? But, you know, this is another place that we know is important. It's a place that, yeah, it's, you know, it's gonna cost a lot, but it's also like, what's the cost of losing? But, you know, and we could never replace it. Irreplaceable. So it's really a priceless thing. So then maybe we can consider what we want to save there. Next slide, please. Other conservation tools. This is the big hopeful stuff. This is where I'm gonna wow you with all the hope. I know. I've been building up to it. Yeah, so, you know, in essence, if buying land protected is we can become more additional, what other tools do we have that we can use to well, build a culture of stewardship, right? To have people involved in protecting these values that we all hold dear. Next slide, please. So it's really about information and education is one component of it, and it's, you know, we share knowledge and create opportunities for connection. You know, connecting people to the issues, to their creeks, to their, you know, to the meadows. You know, so those opportunities to get out there and let people know about these things, and that leads to other opportunities. Next slide, please. For instance, we have a native plant nursery outside the airport. And, you know, it really provides, I'd say, 3 things. So sometimes they can offer guided plant walks, where they'll, you know, take you through the wooded areas there and identify the plants and look at the, you know, the different sorts of conditions where those plants exist, and that's information you can take back if you're rewilding your backyard. But it's also a place where we propagate plants and can supply plants for gardening, for landscaping, for restoration projects. And it's also a place where we get our highest component of volunteer effort happens at the nursery. So it's this place of human connection, you know? So it's connection between each other and connection to the land, to those plants. Next slide, please. In restoration, so, you know, we live in an altered landscape where we, you know, changed everything we've done. Nothing has, no place that we live that we are seeing, as we look across this broad scope, this hasn't been changed by what we do. And, you know, that's been from before settlement too, right? I'm talking about this being a managed landscape, with whether it's, you know, fires to keep meadows out in one of those, you know, that proliferation of happens, it's an agricultural crop. You know, it's a managed place, but we've done a number of things with traditional development that have had either unintended consequences or believing that there's sort of like this that there's no end to what nature can absorb. And so we've done, you know, a number of things And in essence, we've created a shifting baseline. What is normal today? If you're viewing it from the conservation eyes of 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, would look broken. Right? We wouldn't understand why is this creek now full of fish? Why are these trees down? We wouldn't understand if we were looking through the sun. But today, this is the new normal. In the city recently, they passed bylaws that have a restorative piece into it. So it's no longer like must do no harm. It's must do good. So if you get an approval to build a house and some corner of it is in an environmentally sensitive area, then you have to restore 2 times the area of that disturbance to ecological function. How that's done still really needs to be worked on, but that's the first time that it has been, instead of like no loss, then now they must show net gain. So that's a big change that's happening locally. And then think about like what, that shifting baseline restoration brings us back. We can restore and function that creek, that carrying capacity of the creek by restoring the red bearing area, by recreating some of those in-stream structures and doing that work. Next slide, please. But beyond the restoration is enhancement, right? So we want to shift that baseline even further. We can add habitat. So like if you look at these images, there are people here that are adding patchways of pollinator habitat in their neighborhood. They're at butter tubs and other places we've added basking logs for turtles, as well as looking at adding some nesting materials for turtles. There's a saying by Storm Cunningham, what restores us, and that enhancement piece is really part of it. This is a shift from sustainable development to restorative development. And so again, it's that principle behind that net must show net gain. It showed net gain in our habitat and ecological function. Next slide, please. Conservation covenants. This is where Emily first came to NALT. She's our conservation covenant manager. And so conservation covenants are legally binding agreements that are negotiated between a land trust, an entity that's able to hold conservation covenants and a landowner. And that can be a public or private landowner. They are registered on title, so they're binding on successive owners. So it's not just the person talking today, but everyone who ever owns that property is bound by the terms of that conservation covenant. And so NALT's obligation in this is, in that negotiation of the original covenant with the landowner, but also then monitoring to make sure that covenant, that the tenets of that covenant are maintained, right? And all of our covenants now are on the original owners. So we, sometimes you have like a little issue, but nothing major. But we can anticipate that in the fullness of time, in perpetuity, as the land treaties elements will exist in perpetuity, that we will have challenges where some landowner won't want to be bound by that covenant. And so we have to monitor them on an at least annual basis, and maintain a record keeping that can be used as evidence in court to defend the covenant. So it's a big obligation.
How many covenants would you keep?
Well, next slide, please.
Oh. Next slide.
We have this says 12 of them, but we have 13 covenants right now. And this shows that I've talked about a healthy reach beyond the regional district. So we're the bottom star is abutting the capital regional district. And then we have some in the Ski Island. We actually have 4 on the Ski Island. There was the Quaffit regional district, as well as the regional district of Nanaimo. So we have 13. We're negotiating with 2 more, but one that we would be bound by as a landowner. They take a while. They take a long time. If it's going to last in perpetuity, you've got to make sure you've got it right. And so they take a while to negotiate the Mount Benson covenant, we have one there, but it took 10 years. And so it's not a quick process, but it can be a really effective process.
So a covenant is a rule, is a.
It's an agreement of.
An agreement.
Yeah, so it's gonna be like a land use agreement, like what you can do in this area versus what you can do in that area. And what the conditions are, so you have a baseline report about what exists at the time of signing the covenant. And some language around what you're trying to achieve as well, so you might have, it might be some room for restoration. Or there might be some room for harvesting for firewood, depending on every property that the land on one that's gonna be a little bit different. And we've had some where we spend years negotiating, and at the end, we walk away, either because it didn't fit what the landowner wanted, or it doesn't fit what we want, so it can be.
When wildwood be one of the covenants.
Wildwood doesn't have a covenant, but.
That would be a lot of work.
Yeah, wildwood in particular, because it's
Mhm.
the forestry covenant, which would be different. So, most of our covenants are like. Protect the coastal Douglas fir habitats, don't introduce invasive species, don't use chemical control of plants. Don't cut here, but you're okay to cut there, kind of thing. But an ecoforestry covenant is about across that landscape. What does a cut look like? How much of that, your annual, how does that with the plan? How many, board feet or cubic meters of wood have you cut for harvest, so it's a lot more complex. In a wildwood context, but it's something we're looking at.
So when you're creating a covenant. And it hasn't existed before. Is the landowner involved in the creation of
Mhm.
the agreement and they've got to agree? and-
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and like it's a long negotiation, and by two willing parties, right?
Right.
And it's still gonna take quite a long time, and lawyers are involved, so make sure, because you don't want anyone to agree to something that they ultimately wouldn't agree with, right? You want these to be followed. Perfect. Yeah.
So a covenant can maybe lead on to a reserve or a
Mhm.
park or something like that ultimately, or.
Yeah, well, not necessarily, it's like, say you had a 40-acre piece and your house and what you do, your garden and those things existed on 5 acres of it, but it's 35 more acres, and it's posted Douglas fir forest, that you'd like to stay that way forever.
Right.
The covenant will protect that 35 acres. Whether it becomes, it's not like we don't then have like a mechanism in place to turn that into a park. But with covenants on parks, like with Mount Benson Regional Park, it's what our original purposes for raising funds to make it a park were. So, I don't know, let's say a gondola. Whether or not, a gondola would be a thing that stuck with the intentions of the donors that gave the money to buy the park, and then the covenant would have to look at how that worked and all those sorts of things. So we have an ability to have some influence on the management of the park because of the covenant. So that's sort of the relationship with the park. Next slide, please. Water stewardship. Okay, I'm running way over time. You guys need to be out of here by 2.
Sunday.
Water stewardship is like, it's where we connect really. If we're 80% water and we're drinking out of the taps, the water we are is from the Nanaimo River, right? It's a place we connect. It's also that home landscape, the tallest trees congregate around the rivers that are the most abundant, and it's where the exchange of nutrients happens from the forest to the creeks to the sea, and then from the sea back again. Where those tall trees are because of those, those nutrient-rich fish coming up the river and being dragged around by things without thumbs and chewed up and spread around. So it's a real place of connection for us, and it's also that it supports those iconic landscapes, those tall trees, but also those iconic species, bears, wolves, orcas. So it's a place where we have those strong connections, and we actually have committees involved that are organized around watersheds. So like the Friends of Cottle Creek or the Wally Creek Stream Keepers or the Cat Stream Keepers. And then we also support some groups that aren't committees of NALT that we work with, like the park stream keepers. So this is a real part of community connection, and people really connect with creeks in their backyards and, in their parks. So this has been it's an important place where we meet and where we do these things. Next slide, please. And then we have, since 2020, we've had a school water stewards program. So we started off in 2020, piloting it in 2 schools. And it's grown to be, let me show you this right. It's in 16 schools and school districts 68, 69 now. And the buzzwords are, we provide curriculum connected, place-based experiential learning, which means we take kids out of their classroom, teach them lessons that are tied to the curriculum, bring them into their watersheds, and get their hands dirty. And we do this at no cost for students or schools to participate. We don't want there to be any financial barriers for kids connecting to their watersheds and learning these lessons, right? And there's some quotes there like, this is better than recess. It's like the kids are really tuned into it. They really enjoy the experience, and Emily's involved in a bunch of that as well. And then there are also opportunities to do stewardship actions here. I'll talk about one that was sort of accidental and one that's planned. So there's on Northfield Marsh, which is by Saywent School, which is one of the schools we piloted this in. There's some kids walking along this path that runs along the marsh. And they're smelling a smell that they didn't think should be there. But that smells like sewage, that's Mrs. Ty, who's Judith, is my what is that smell? And so the teacher went back to the principal and said, the kids are smelling something that doesn't seem like it should be there after learning about what different things should be in that marsh. And so then the school contacted NALT, and NALT contacted the city, and we found out that there'd been accident, unintended consequences, a sanitary line, sewage hooked into a storm drain line. So there's raw sewage going to this. But the kids who knew that smell shouldn't be there, recognized it because it's programmed, and then we were able to move that up the chain and have it corrected. So that's accidental stewardship. But then also say once they did this planned stewardship action where there was neighbors dumping their garden waste by the creek in this little corner of park that exists right beside the school. And so from that garden waste came up a whole bunch of exotic and invasive plant species growing into this through this forest that leads up to a Gary Oak Meadow at the top and the marsh at the bottom. But so the kids, looked at this and with school staff and NALT staff identified this place. Well, we can do something about this. We can haul away that garden waste. We can pull out those invasives and we can plant native species. So they did that. They got the city to bring in a bin so that all that garden waste got hauled away. And the invasive and exotic plants we pulled and native plant species were planted in there. And then, but then the problem is, well, that's all hidden until the next person comes and dumps the garden waste. So what they did then is they got these door knobs. Things you'd hang on the door. They had information on one side about how to handle the garden waste, and on the other side, the kids drew pictures of the work they've been doing, and then they went and put them on all the door handles all around. Like what a great connection! And that's really it's through connecting those kids to that watershed, to that place, the whole community is thriving. So it's like such an exceptional thing. It's a wonderful program. I talked about membership helping to fund things that are hard to fund. For some reason, it's a very hard to fund program, but it's an incredible one. In my maybe dark heart of the future, I imagine that we're growing an informed army of voters for the next wave of challenges we'll face. Next slide, please. So what are we going to do? I have my eldest granddaughter is 13, but when she was 5, she took up doing this thing for a while where she'd have a stuffing toy, and she'd walk up and keep going. Oh no! What are we gonna do? and it would be like as if there was nothing, some outside unstoppable influence that gravity had made this happen, which is very cute. in a 5-year-old, but maybe not in, you know, how we make things, how we organize ourselves, and make decisions around the place we live and what we care for. So you know, we don't have to drop the stuff. We have agency in this. In what we do, with the decisions we make. And, you know, when we vote, we can talk to people and say, you know, what are you doing to make sure that this, you know, this place that's important to you, this creek, this meadow is going to be protected? What do you, you know, what are our priorities in terms of keeping these landscapes and the species alive? So we have agency. Next slide, please. We don't need to pay ourselves into it, right? That's, we've been, you know, the unintended consequences and our belief in nature without boundaries that we can just keep drawing on. We don't have to do those things. We can do things with intention. We can practice restorative development where we're looking at what have we lost and how do we get that back. You know, and so you know, I say, you know, often when you look at the world, or we turn on the radio and you hear the news today, there's despair, right? But the place you find hope is acting locally and acting with your neighbors. And so we have this opportunity to be involved and to give each other hope and to support each other through these times of despair, doing hopeful acts that are good. So next slide, which I think might be the very final slide. There we go.
Oh, bravo.
Unless everyone wants to get back outside to this beautiful day, I'd be happy to answer any questions.